Welcome, everybody, to today's talk. I'm Katrina Fenlon. I'm an assistant professor at the UMD College of Information Studies. And along with many of the folks on the call today, I am part of the Center for Archival Futures, which is the center that's hosting this talk. This is a relatively new iSchool center. It started January of last year, and we're a group of interdisciplinary researchers from the iSchool and from beyond the iSchool whose work intersects at archives and digital curation, which we conceive very broadly. So we're interested in the systems, the processes, the institutions that care for and enable the use of digital objects and data over time. The various projects that fall under CAFE's umbrella take a wide range of human-centered approaches to understanding topics, including data in communities, knowledge ecosystems, data life cycles. So this speaker series is our flagship event. It's normally held on the first Wednesday of each month during the semester, and we host speakers who are at the cutting edge of archives and digital curation, research and practice across a wide variety of institutions. You can find previous recordings of our previous illustrious guest speakers at the CAFE event page link, which I can copy and put in the chat if it's not already there. And it's my pleasure now to welcome this month's speaker. And I believe, Eric, you're doing the introduction today. I'll hand off the mic to you.
Thank you so much. I'm Eric Holm. I am one of the adjuncts in the iSchool. I first met Ferrin maybe 2 years ago, and I don't know, Ferrin, if you remember this, but I think our first interaction was when we were at the Association of Canadian Archivists meeting, and I think Ferrin just kept putting really interesting remarks in the chat. This is 2020, I think, so it was a virtual conference, and yeah, so Ferrin kept putting really interesting things in the chat, and I interacted with him a few times, and then a few months later, the Society of American Archivists decided to put us together through the mentorship program. So I got to know Ferrin a little bit more, but I really got to know him because I am on the editorial board of the American Archivist. And as a member of the editorial board, we got to read his entry for the Peace Award, which he won. His essay really spoke to me as a queer man who grew up in the 1990s, very much aware that if I were 10 years older, I would probably be dead. And the essay also struck me very much just how human it was compared to a lot of archival literature. And he makes great connections between his life and his archives work, and also talks really in a very powerful way about the trauma of archives work. So just to give you a bit of his formal bio, Ferrin Evans is a Master of Information candidate at the University of Toronto, where he worked with the Media Commons Archive and with the Sexual Representation Collection. In the past, he has worked with the Gay Archives of Quebec, the Archives of Toronto, Toronto Queer Film Festival, Cinema Politica, and the Mixed New York Queer Experimental Film Festival, where he served on the board of directors. In 2020, he was named to the premier cohort of the Association of Moving Image Archivists Diversity and Inclusion Fellowship Program. And the following year, he was awarded the SAA Peace Award for outstanding graduate student writing. His work centers upon queer trauma and disconnection within archival studies. He will also attend the Faculty of Law at McGill University next fall. So, so please welcome Ferrin. And if you're ready, I'll hand it off to you. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Eric. So hello, everyone. My name is Ferrin Evans, and I'm really honored that you've chosen to give me an hour or so of your time today. I know time's in short supply. I'd like to give special thanks to a few people in attendance or who I know will be watching this when it's posted in a week. First, you, Eric. I remember we were set up on an SAA mentorship, and poor Eric is like pulling teeth for him to get anything out of me in the middle of my grief my like grief episodes of early COVID period. But I really appreciate your patience and your believing in the things that I write. It's really meaningful to know that I made it onto your syllabus at UMD, and it means a lot. And sometimes emotionally turbulent times to have someone who believes in the things you write. Second, University of British Columbia's Jen Douglas, who I think I saw in the attendance list. Hi, Jen. As you'll hear, she spurred me towards a greater and more radical sense of vulnerability within my scholarship. Again, I'll talk about it later, but she gave me inspiration when I thought nothing could give me inspiration. And finally, University of Toronto's Karen Sertam, who I know is going to be watching this in a week, and who will be so embarrassed to be pointed out, but she was my teacher for the course for which I wrote this final paper and got the P's, and who provided me with something so invaluable during the creation of this article that I'll be discussing today. And those things are space, gentleness, and care. Not terms that you often associate with academia, but something that was so powerful to me back in 2020. I'll circle back to this at the end of the talk. So quickly, content warning might be in order. This speech deals with intense grief, depression, substance use, and suicidality. These themes are so important and we need to talk about them, but please, I urge anyone who feels overwhelmed to take care of their own boundaries and mental health above all. Again, I thank you for any time that you've offered me. So I named this talk, let's see if I can, I never really got good at Zoom in the years of COVID Zoom. So share screen. Okay, beautiful. So I named this talk a supposedly fun thing I'll never do again, not just to be cheeky. I'm sure my teachers were like, awesome. But it was just sort of a shout out to the late David Foster Wallace, who, a literary giant who at the height of his career succumbed to a lifelong battle with depression and committed suicide. And it's this cognitive disconnect, a crumbling interiority made starker by the accolades thrown one's way by exterior forces. This disconnect is really what my paper was reaching for. And so I gladly copped that title. Much of what I'm discussing today centers upon an article that is soon to be published in American Archivist, a piece that not only discusses, or a piece that discusses the loss of an ex-lover at the onset of the coronavirus pandemic. I'd like to share a portion of it. On April 7, 2020, the amorphous dread of a building pandemic became painfully clear as COVID-19 took someone I loved. Having spent most of my adult life in New York City, I spent the month before this tragic day looking south of the border with worry. Rates of the infectious disease exponentially increased every day, sending my friends into increasing levels of panic. As the degree of separation between me and those contracting COVID-19 lessened, I still held on to some semblance of optimism that I might weather this period with qualified relief. Instead, degrees became degree when an estranged lover's face appeared on my Facebook feed, courtesy of a mutual friend. In the post, our friend, photographer, shared portraits and an expression of disbelief about the death. Writing him, I asked what happened, and I learned that coronavirus was the culprit. Even in articulating this story, I still find it hard to move past a stage of denial. At a time when I'm called to work shifts at my university's archives, as well as class projects centered around archival ideals, I ironically find myself stalled in some liminal space, unable to reconcile past and present. Perhaps this overwhelming feeling comes from the fact that as I try to grapple with more conventional notions of archival appraisal, I am unable to stop judging the value of objects connecting me to the one I have lost. Letters and sweaters, trinkets and texts, my personal archive brings me to tears. These mementos now serve as memorial to a lost life and to my relationship with it. They remind me of the love and the anger, the disappointment, and the bitterness. These mementos now serve as memorial to a lost life. Oh, I'm sorry. I guess I'll end it there. As you might imagine, this final paper was utterly painful to write. Every day for the period of the final paper for this class, and for 2 months after that, I would sit down to my laptop and just sometimes start crying, sometimes just feel blank. I just found myself in a really difficult mental health space where I could barely function, could barely keep my own life together, much less complete graduate studies. I'd like to make a note that it's not just me. Some of you are lecturers, so you probably know firsthand, but I have a close friend who's a lecturer, and he has 20 graduate students across 2 sections, or he did his last teaching term. And out of those 20 graduate students, he reported that 6 to 8 student reports of serious mental health issues. So people saying they were going to the hospital or very serious circumstances. And this was shocking to me, this, 6 to 8 student reports among 20 students, until I thought back to my period of barely getting by in 2020. But yeah, I think it's worth thinking about that statistic. I guess I'd say that it's with no, I guess I would say that it's sort of, it's striking to me that I would reach this place with graduate studies feeling so empty and so impossible to do. Because we all join grad school with such idealistic notions that we're going to change the world and uncover all of these amazing lost histories and just do the work of preserving and keeping. In fact, I remember when I applied to graduate school, the swooning love letter to the archives of a personal statement that I wrote. I believe, with no hint of exaggeration or romanticism, no, not a hint of romanticism, that saving records by marginalized voices can save marginalized lives, as it did for me. I want to inspire others to relish history, to cry in archives, to find traces of themselves in fragile and disappearing texts, and to do the work to make the invisible visible. So this is sort of maybe an overshare, but I really was invested in the power of history to help marginalized communities envision themselves, to be so moved by what they uncover that they literally cry. So then what if the one crying in the archives is you? And it's not because you're so awe-stricken. What if it's because you're about 2 months late on a paper and you're overloaded with stress? And even worse, you've decided to give all of your free time to equity committees and institutionally sanctioned social change strategies, but not enough to your own actual living, breathing community members. Looking back, I'm a bit embarrassed to discuss myself so candidly, but such is the condition of a student. If you're a student, think about that pressure, or if you're not a student, try to recall that feeling as well. The urge to make the most of your education, to intelligently divide your time between your degree, and the things that will make your degree more useful than the same degree in the hands of a member of your cohort. This drive to succeed is why, to distract from the grief, I spent weeks helping to draft an EDI statement for an archiving professional association. In the grand unveiling, one could practically hear the polite golf claps and vague interest from the next public meeting. The drive to succeed is why, to distract from the grief, I completed countless unpaid committee assignments and unpaid meetings, a constant stressor when I considered how little I was making to even consider paying off any of my direct loans. The funny and obvious thing about this all is that distracting from grief does not work. It bores a hole into your heart, one that takes away the pleasure and privilege of doing archival work and scholarship. Before my fellowship meetings, sleepless nights, after my committee meetings, an early cocktail, an extra puff, a stabilizer, and empty time. One day I got sick of feeling the way that I was feeling. I hated myself from my inability to make progress on any looming deadline in my life. I decided to go back to the basics, and I searched for my favorite assigned readings of my first year in grad school. Surely something would bring the motivation back. And I'll return to my article for the next part. Jen Douglas is in the audience, and since she's read my paper, I hope she doesn't mind me referencing her scholarship. Appearing in the fall 2019 issue of Archivaria, the article "Treat Them with the Reverence of Archivists: Records Work, Grief Work, and Relationship Work" is a powerful personal prologue from Jennifer Douglas, led by the statement that grief, my personal grief, transformed me. It changed how I see the world, how I relate to other people, how I understand and envision my work. In 2012, I experienced a profound personal loss when my daughter died just before she was born. Building out from this story, she and her two co-authors built a conceptual framework in which to explore the relationships between archives and grief. From nowhere, an article I had read half a dozen times over the past months hit me like a ton of bricks. I felt seen. To clarify, I didn't feel any sort of directly comparable grief to Douglas, nor to the other bereaving parents of whom the authors write. As a queer man, I probably will never know the joy of expectation as it relates to parenthood, nor the pain of miscarriage or death. Still, as the article unfolded, I felt a continuous wave of unlikely resonances. Her grief, so different than mine, spoke to me in ineffable ways. In trying to understand the strange magic of reading that paper, I sketch out in my paper a concept of affective porosity. It relies on Marika Seafor's framing of affect within the archives. Affect is a force that creates a relation between a body and the world. It is at the core of how we form, sustain, and break social relations, differences, and individual and collective identities. Archives are in large part about creating, documenting, maintaining, reconciling, and reproducing such relations between records and people, ideologies, institutions, systems, and worlds across bounds of time and space. Building upon that cornerstone, I write, affective porosity is the best visualization with which I can articulate the ways in which Douglas et al. Make me rethink the nature of my own affective containers. Previously thought to be so rigid and calcified, I find them permeated by others' ostensibly unrelated pain. We seep into each other. In turn, these porous containers allow my archival practice in opening outward, seeking richness and humanity in those stories I might otherwise have dismissed as other people's problems. And I don't have it in my presentation today, but really this idea of affective porosity was talking about how I was approaching my archival interest from a specifically queer space, and how moved I am by, you know, sort of HIV/AIDS, magnetic media, and, you know, sort of ACT UP pamphlets and things that are very specific in nature, and how it was just sort of unexpected and so thoroughly moving how I read this article by Jen Douglas. And I guess the best way I can put it is, instead of feeling broken down, I felt broken open. And that someone was so willing to connect with their pain, their vulnerability, and that's sort of, I don't know if I would say gave me permission to talk about loss, and to talk about not being okay, and to talk about the things I've messed up and the disconnection I felt. But someone who writing about such a different type of grief sort of made me like seep into her history, and, you know, possibly vice versa, if I was able to write about my vulnerability and sort of my positionality of vulnerability, that maybe there could be a seeping back and forth. I don't know if that makes sense, but it really sort of did me well during that time in my life. In fact, I started to ask myself, like, how can you be more porous? Like, how, if your modes of thinking, your politics, your positionality and your placement is something that makes you feel calcified, how can you open yourself up to maybe the humanity and the lesson of these, of, you know, disjunctive relationships with records and people and institutions. So in the rest of my article, I turn outward with some sort of desire to not be too navel-gazy, and I sort of became, I sort of sketch out how I would envision changes within the archival classroom, workplace, and professional associations. And, you know, if this topic and this sort of work interests you, you can check out the new American Archivist. But in the spirit of this talk, I just want to sort of peel it back and talk about maybe some of the biggest things I learned during my time in graduate school. I'm not sure what the makeup of this audience is. I know there are some instructors and some, but hopefully there are some students in this talk as well. But the lessons I would say I learned, one, give at least some of the time you're giving to institutions, to your community. I did maybe an embarrassing number of IDE committees, anti-racism committees, and other, you know, sort of unpaid institution focused work on how institutions can better respond to, you know, social issues, sociocultural issues. And when I look back, I guess, at the last few years of grad school, the things that have filled me up with the most, you know, life and passion have been the personal connections I've made. And I really wish that I would have spent more time doing sort of student-led initiatives and things that were not sort of centered upon the institution. I think there's this mindset of scarcity that some of us really hold on to when we're students, because there's not enough jobs and they don't pay enough and everything's very precarious. And so you, or at least I, tried to beef up my resume in certain ways that would make me a stronger hiring candidate. And really what I needed to keep going and what I needed to not burn out, and I spent most of this master's burnt out, was more time with the people who were feeling the way that I was feeling. Academia has this way of, individualizing you and putting all the pressure on your shoulders. And I think those of us who approach it that way would do well to refocus away from the institution and towards, your community. 2, believe in the power of your voice at work. So I had a paid internship at University of Toronto Media Commons, and I thought that because I was lucky enough to get this, paid internship, and that I didn't want to sort of rock the boat, and I wanted to sort of go along with whatever they were, suggesting and not adding in my feedback. And I asked for permission to spend more time looking at our IDE policies and to do more work around that. And probably way too late in my internship, I realized I could have been doing work that was more in line with what I wanted to do. So I would say if there's students who feel like, their bosses may not be open to their feedback, it's worth at least trying. 3, dig into positionality. If you're able, dig into vulnerability. I've always been someone who's approached academia with a sort of unwillingness to conform in certain ways, but I do see this sort of homogenizing wave that goes over the cohorts of trying not to be too radical or trying not to rock the boat. And I've always dug into my positionality in my academic work, and I would recommend everyone feeling that sort of comfort. And if you're able, dig into vulnerability. I can't say that everyone would be comfortable writing about a friend or an ex-lover's death during COVID. And those sort of things are just cathartic for me and help me get through some painful events. I'm always comfortable writing, but I don't know. I think when I trust my gut and I'm willing to be more vulnerable, my writing is when it ends up being the best. I don't know. Yeah, it's sort of tricky though, because it's possible that the most vulnerable students are airing their vulnerabilities in a way that we have to consider the ethics of. And finally, I would just say be easy on yourself. I was really tough on myself during grad school. I didn't approach my mental health in a way that was that gave myself space to not write every day and to not try to force things out. And I think it would have been a lot easier if I had developed the mechanisms for more balanced self-care, meditation, sleep, and all of those things that we talk about, but that are so hard to maintain. I don't know. I suppose I just wanted to create this forum when Eric invited me to more than anything tell other students who might see this at some point that that someone sees you, that when you're anxious that you're not going to make it through, or that you're, I don't know, it's tricky to say, but like I would say that the time during my grad school experience really sort of was the rockiest mental health period of my life. And I don't know, it's easier said than done, but I really wish I could have gone back and told myself to be easy on myself. I guess I wonder if anyone has questions about what it was like to, or like, I guess if I would ask if anyone has questions about like what it means to sort of embrace vulnerability in student work, and or like if anyone has feelings about that, like is it dangerous to sort of air your vulnerabilities out to an institution, or is that what we need in the field to be more willing to sort of go there? I don't know.
This is open for anyone to talk. So I want to give the students who are here particular opportunities for STIPs to talk if you're interested, but certainly faculty, you're welcome to as well, or guests.
Hey, this is Katrina. I just wanted to say, in the spirit of conversation, it might help. We can always pause the recording at this point if people want to have a conversation, or we can also take the shared screen down so that we can see more faces rather than just the video. No worries. The only thing I'll say is just a big round of applause for Ferrin and for everyone for sharing their vulnerabilities on this call, and stay tuned for our next Cafe Speaker Series event next month.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ferrin.
Oh, thanks, Ferrin.